Brokenness Meets Grace. We're so happy to have you with us again on this podcast. As you know, we are never by ourselves. Today we are blessed to have a special guest with us today. Please introduce yourself, sir.
Hi everyone and good afternoon everyone. My name is Brenton and I am a youth pastor, I am a school teacher, I am a friend, I am a brother, but most of all I am a servant of the Lord.
Awesome.
Welcome.
Thank you for coming in, Brenton. Brenton is a very good friend of ours.
We have a lot of friends.
A lot. We work together in a lot of ministry-related projects. He helps a lot with our foundation, and he's got an amazing testimony. But most importantly, as you know, everybody that will come on the show, it's always related to the topic that we're covering for the day. And he's got an amazing input for us with this week's topic is concerned. So we're so happy to have you. Thank you for coming in. So last week we covered, introductory for Brokenness Meets Grace. We covered what is grace, and then we covered what is brokenness. And we're happy that we can actually go into each segment sort of dissecting what types of brokenness there are. And the first type of brokenness that we're going to be discussing is addiction. And that's what's on the discussion points today. We all know that there's many forms of addiction. And the impact that it has on us as people in terms of, our character, the kind of lives that we end up living is detrimental. It's very, very negatively impactful. And we just wanted to talk about that. How do we find grace, within addiction? How do we resolve that form of brokenness within us and actually make ourselves or come out of it better and to glorify God out of it? What is the relationship, between brokenness and addiction? What would you say it is, Brenton?
Ladies first.
Okay.
No pressure. In line with our definition of brokenness that we addressed in our last episode, brokenness is a separation from God, right? It's a result of a separation from God and living life further away from the source of the one who created you. And addiction, in illustration-wise, is like a sharpnel. So brokenness is an explosion, and there's all these sharpnels that come from that explosion of brokenness, and addiction forms part of those sharpnels. There are many forms of brokenness, and addiction is one of them. For me, that's just how I envision it. That it's definitely rooted, also spiritually, because brokenness is you are soul sick or spirit sick, right? And you're yearning for something, and you're yearning for fulfillment. And addiction comes as a form of a stronghold. The enemy uses it as a form of a stronghold to kind of seduce and entice you in thinking that this is the fulfillment that you need, but it is bondage in a sense. And that's where the spiritual affliction comes from, the spiritual hold comes from, because it's not something that is... my understanding of addiction anyway, it's not willful, right? It's sneaky, it's deceptive, and it kind of holds you hostage at that point that you don't have as much free will to kind of to break free from it.
And it's interesting that you say, or you mention rather, I like the imagery, of brokenness being an explosion and all of these little pieces that break off. And that's what this podcast is about, discussing the little pieces of brokenness, the I like to call them symptoms of the actual disease, being brokenness itself. And addiction is definitely that. And you, Brenton, what would you say the relationship between the two is?
Spiritually and physically. When I hear the word brokenness is actually the substitute of rejection. That is when you get different kind of brokenness, and then sometimes people confuse the brokenness and the shattered. Because when a glass is shattered, you can't really put it together. But when it comes to brokenness, when there's brokenness, God allows that because He can restore that brokenness. Because sometimes most people that don't understand is sometimes God breaks us. So that we can be broken, but why does He do that? Is to position us. To position us in such a way that He puts us the pieces back together like that. Because He is the potter, we are the clay. And that is what it means into that, like what you said, there's something that you said with the bondage. That is actually the root. That bondage actually has another root, and what is that? That is insecurity. And then that brokenness, it just breaks and it breaks and it breaks. And if you think about it, each piece represents a part of brokenness. And we need to fall into that. Now, when it comes to addiction, addiction is the substitute of acceptance.
Sure.
And that is why when we get in, like you said, what is the relationship? Addiction is trying to substitute of the lies of the enemy to not let you be accepted. And when you take the addiction, you are taking so much addiction that you're not even accepted into the addiction, but the addiction has already accepted you. And that is why when it comes to, like when you say the relationship of addiction, I'm always thinking acceptance. Because we can talk a little bit later about that, because I can share my experience in that. And then brokenness also, there's good brokenness and there's bad brokenness. I love it when I have to break for God. Because when I'm feeling broken, that is when I can give God all the glory. I say, yeah, I am, Lord. I am so broken. Lord, take over me, Lord. Because you are the only one who can put me back together. Let your anointing restore me. And then that's the definition that I can give with the relationship of brokenness. But like what both of you said, it's spot on. There's different categories and levels of brokenness.
Definitely. And I mean, I agree with both of you in my understanding of it, or my definition of the relationship between the two. You know, I like what you said, because what is common in both addiction and any other form of brokenness is that void, right? We're always seeking to fill something that's missing.
Exactly.
We're always wanting to, you know, not feeling completely whole because of our proximity to God. The further away we are, you know, from our Creator, the less whole we feel. And instead, and what the enemy does is he'll make it seem as though there's other things that can fill that void, but they don't do it permanently. And instead, it results in that bondage. You know, you end up being bound to something that's only temporarily filling a void. Because you have to keep going back to that thing, you know, you have to keep going back to that same thing because it doesn't fill the void permanently. It's temporary.
Now with the word temporary, it's amazing how a situation or brokenness or addiction or anything is there temporary, but we end up making permanent choices
from it. Exactly.
Wow.
We make permanent choices of a temporary moment, especially with addiction. Because most people, when they hear addiction, oh no, it's drugs. No, there's
so much.
there's emotion, there's pain, there's a whole lot of things when it comes to those kind of addiction. Because I don't think people is getting the clarity of addiction. There's no clarity of it. Because addiction hasn't got a, what you call it, a permanent position. That addiction is temporary, but the minute you're there, it's like, okay, I'm making a permanent choice on it.
And it attaches itself to you. And I love that point that you raised. I think it's such an important point because, like you said, you think of an addiction or you think of an addict as somebody who's just addicted to drugs, you know, or any form of substance abuse, you know. It's so important to actually highlight, and I hope that we'll be able to do that through this discussion, to highlight how many different forms of addiction there are. And maybe it will shed a light and people will actually come to realize that, hang on, you know, I'm struggling with something like that. I'm addicted to, you know, I have an emotional addiction. I have, you know, a different form of addiction because we categorize it as just this thing that's far from us just because we're not addicted to alcohol or addicted to smoking or addicted to drugs. But it's such a far-reaching consequence of that void, of filling the void, that it can become anything. Anything that you choose ultimately to fill the void that you have within you, or to fill the brokenness, fill the cracks with, can become an addiction because you end up relying on it. You have to constantly go back to it to fill those cracks. So that's very, very, very true. And another thing that I wanted to mention earlier that I realized also is that the commonality between people, or all people, all of us that are alive, are the fact that we're going to experience trials, right? We're alive, it's a fact. We can't run away from it. We're here on this earth, we're going to experience trials, we're going to experience pain of some sort. And what happens is it's the inability for us to actually experience or go through the trial that actually makes us exposed or more fallible to addiction, right? Because what we do is, because we are not capable of handling trials on our own. We're not made that way. We crumble, we break, we see it as this huge challenge, this huge mountain. So what ends up happening is, because we're not made to be able to withstand the storm alone, we need something to help down the pain. We need something to help make it easier to go through the trials and the challenges that we experience here in the world, and just to quiet the noise, And so that's when addiction becomes prevalent, because now we start attaching to all of these little things, And I mentioned trials as a commonality, but what do you guys think is the common denominator when it comes to addiction of all sorts? What's the one thing that actually is the commonality that says that's why somebody becomes addicted to whatever?
Well, I think even in my other videos that I post on this channel, I'm so obsessed with the beginning, Genesis, and I always reference it because for me it has all the answers. Honestly, my experience with reading the book of Genesis has answered all the questions that I've had, and I'm going to reference it here again. Going back to how I answered the question of what is brokenness, and I referenced how brokenness come into the play, and it was an act of disobedience from the first man and woman. And I think the same tactic that the enemy, because we have a very real enemy, we may not often like to acknowledge it or accept it, but there is a very real enemy who is out to keep us hostage, right, to deceit and lies, and keep us further and further away from God's truth, because he knows that in that truth there is liberation and freedom, right? So the same tactic that enemy used in the garden is the same one he's using now. And that was basically to entice mankind to believe that what God had already given them was not enough. And that is the commonality that we're faced with right now with addiction, because we think we want and we need more when we don't really. We have all that we need, but because there's a ploy, because culture, because the world speaks loudly to the things that we need to have more of. That's all you see. That is just like, high definition in everything that you do, that you see, your people, your friends, your communities. We need more, looking past what we already have as enough. And that deceit and that lie is so enticing to the flesh, right? Because disobedience came into the world, and now we have contamination. The flesh is contaminated, and we are predisposed to choosing wrong things, right? We can't help but be. I don't know scripture very well, but there's a reference. Paul says that he tries, but he can't stop wanting the bad desires. He can't help it. His flesh is always lured, by evil stuff, and that's the nature of sin. That's the nature of rebellion. And that's generally my understanding of the commonality of addiction. It's because we're so predisposed to lusting after fleshly desires that we don't want God's truth. We would rather reference, or we would rather look out for temporary reprieves, and those look much better than reading the book of God. Those are nicer. Those are easier to take in, to do. But it's false because they just give you problems. If you do it long enough, you will see that it ends. There's an end to it.
Right? You're basically taking almost everything that I want to say. You really took everything that
we don't take comments here.
But like I want to do what the Bible says, you are the salt. So I would like to add some salt to that. The spirit, the emotion, basically your body, mind and soul, all three has something in common, and that is a longing. There's a longing for some connection. And what you're talking about with Paul, there's also a story about where Paul writes in Romans 8, where he talks about how to live in the spirit. Because the flesh, the greatest battle is not with the enemy. The greatest battle is between you and the mind. Because the mind is the most powerful tool that God has given us. I sometimes say it's the most powerful yet dangerous gift that God has given us.
Because it's so powerful.
It's the mind, it's the free will. And then there's a longing that we need to be connected to. And then the enemy brought that addiction, but how he brought it is like, I bring it back to the story, like you said with Genesis. I love that. I always ask the question, and I said before, why did Satan enter into the garden as a snake? Why did he enter into a snake? And then it actually got to the revelation because it looked like he fit in the garden. That's why Eve never got scared or anything. So what happened? So he manipulated her, brokenness language. And then she, because of the lust of the eye and the body and the flesh, what did she do? She took from the addiction. She ate it. And that is where I believe is the mind is the dominator. Because the enemy can't get into your mind. He can't read your mind. He throws something into your head because he knows that we all desire a longing. But sometimes it's not a physical longing, it's a spiritual longing. But then the enemy blindsides that so that your body thinks of that, and then you have this replacement. Like I said, with the acceptance, it's the substitute of an addiction.
Very true.
That's I say that's the dominator, is the mind.
And that's so true. Because you know, the mind is like crazily powerful. You know, and that's where everything starts, and that's where everything can end. You know, a simple truth. For example, painkillers. Let's talk about just something as basic as a Panadol. You know, medication is chemically created to not necessarily fix the pain, but it's chemically created to go to the pain receptors.
It numbs the pain.
Do you get what I'm saying? Like it goes to the place in your brain that is telling you you're feeling pain, not necessarily to the pain itself. So you're not taking a pill to go to your back. You know, when you drink the pill, it doesn't go to your back. You know, it fixes the part in your brain, the receptors, the pain receptors in your brain that is telling your brain that I'm in pain in this certain area. You know, and that just goes to show just how powerful our mind is. You know, that in that space, and of course, spiritually speaking, we don't refer to the mind as the brain. We refer to the mind as the heart. You know, your posture, your soul, right? But it goes to say, and it's the same thing, that because at the core of our soul, at the core of our mind, of our heart, there is a lack, like you said, because something is missing. We always know that we need to fill it, right? And like you said also, we go to other sources to fill it, because the problem is going to God means you have to face truth. You have to face up to the fact that at the core, that pain is surface. There's a core issue, like you said. And having to go and stand in front of God, or having to put yourself and say, you know what, I surrender, I don't know what to do with myself, help me. He's going to have to pull stuff out from the surface, like the deep roots, and bring those to the surface so that you can address them. And a lot of us don't like that because that is painful. A lot of us don't like that because it hurts like hell. The whole process of him actually pulling the stuff up to the surface and actually working through it with you hurts. So instead of taking our stuff to God, we're like, how can I dull this? How can I pretend this doesn't exist? And then we attach ourselves to all sorts of different addictions because of that. And that's the real issue, I think, around all the forms of addictions. And you both covered it very well, you know, because that's the end and the beginning of it, our minds, you know. These ideas are planted and we start to believe them and start to see them play out in our lives. The next question that I wanted to ask is, because we know, you know, how powerful addiction can become and how incredibly poisonous it can be, not only physical addiction to substances or whatever, but every form of addiction, I think, in my opinion, is poison, you know. But I also believe that as we take it on, it's like a bartering system, you know. We choose to take the addiction, but ultimately we are giving the addiction something back. We are losing something to the addiction. What would you think is we lose? What would you say we lose to addiction when we surrender to addiction and we actually become addicted to things? What are we giving up of ourselves?
So much.
Yeah, like a lot, right?
So much. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, it's a sense of bondage. So you're giving up your freedom, really.
Definitely.
You know, you're giving up your freedom. In most cases, you give up your self-worth, your integrity, you know, your family, you know, your loved ones, your relationships, your career. I think there's definitely, depending on the addiction, because you get severe addictions, depending on what it is. I mean, emotional addictions, if you had to scale it with drug addiction, it's very different consequences,
Yeah.
right?
Definitely.
So definitely depending on the addiction, but regardless, there's always something at stake. It's not isolated. When you go through addiction, you would think that it just affects you, you know, but there is a domino effect, there is a ripple effect, and that's one thing I've really recently God has revealed to me of late, and it's just something so profound in terms of revelation, is choices. Like how important choices are, and the domino effect they have in our lifetime are so critical, you know. And addiction, in a sense, yes, there is a spiritual connotation to it, but you're still presented with a choice. You know, everything is rooted around a choice, and depending on what choice you make, the consequences are a result of that, sadly. So. Yeah, I think definitely there's a lot at stake, regardless of what it is. There are differing consequences with each one, but nothing that is bondage or nothing that Satan wraps up as a present is good. There's always something, there's a carrot he's dangling, and it doesn't promise you anything good.
Nothing good.
Wow.
Yeah.
The question was, what do you surrender to addiction?
Yeah. So what do you lose?
What do you lose?
Yeah.
What do you lose? There's so much.
Yeah.
There's one of identity, but let's leave identity one side.
Okay.
I believe you lose character.
Yeah.
Because the minute you surrender to addiction, that addiction steals your character. Like before, oh no, it's the drugs who did that. It's the addiction who did that. And all of this stuff, and I said, hold on. That drug, whatever substance or anything that you are taking, it doesn't know your name. It doesn't know even how to spell your name. It doesn't even care about you. It's you that makes that real. So therefore your character, you are trading your character into that, and then that becomes alive to you. So you lose your character, which comes back to the part when you said trials and tribulation. Trials is a short period for your character to be molded.
Yes.
And then your tribulation is your character, how you're going to walk in that character. Because the Bible also says in Acts 14:22, through trials and tribulations is the entrance to the kingdom of God. That's why it is painful when we come forward to the Father. But let's talk about outside of that. You lose your character. Because once you take that drug and common sense and experiences, your character becomes how the enemy wants you to have. Because you've surrendered your character to the addiction, any addiction, whether it's drug, food, emotions, or whatsoever. Now the enemy can give your character that's not real, because he's a liar. So he gives you that character, and it's like, no, you are invincible now because you have this. You are a conqueror now because you have this. You are now a man or a woman because you are in this. So basically, you are no longer your character. You are the character of a lie. So what's going to happen is going to make you keep going back to that addiction.
Because you have to feel that
Exactly.
character.
It makes you numb, but it makes you alive to the lies.
Definitely.
Very true.
That is so powerful, because I think in itself, that's the crux of addiction. It's believing in a lie, right? It's a lie that's telling you that you feel good, it's temporary, it's false.
Sin feeds sin.
Exactly.
Addiction feeds addiction.
Exactly.
And you said consequences. I need to say something on that.
Yeah.
Your sin and addiction, your mistake, your choices whatsoever, you can choose it.
Yeah.
But the consequences to it, you can't choose it.
And those are dire, those are hectic.
You just can't choose it.
And I think that's what makes it even harder. I think for me, what I was going to say, and combines what we both were saying, is that freedom. You know,
Yes.
if you are taking in the addiction, ultimately you are trading in your freedom. You know, because like you said, you're going to beget addiction begets addiction. You know, at some point or another, that one addiction, it's not meant to last you a lifetime. It's not meant to satisfy you permanently. So you are going to have to replace it with something else.
Exactly.
Either something stronger, someone else, a different type of food, whatever. Like you need to constantly be going up and up and up and up. And what that does ultimately is it leads to your self-destruction. Because there is nothing that is ever going to be enough besides God. And that is the bottom line. You know, it's not something people like to hear. You know, a lot of people may even think it's another Christian lie. You know, it's another thing we tell people to repent and whatever. Call it what you want to call it, but the fact of the matter is, the person or the being that created you is the only one that can fix you, because they know you intricately. You know, they know every part of your soul, every detail, and they're the only ones that can actually fix it. But because we're always searching outside of that, we need to keep filling it with more and more and more. And so you become addicted and more addicted and more addicted and more addicted. And the cycle just continues. But ultimately, you get stuck in bondage. You become a slave.
Yeah, it is.
You become a slave to that thing, and your character changes. You know, a lot of people will tell you, I don't even know who I am anymore, right? I don't even know who I am. I look in the mirror and I don't recognize the person that's looking in the mirror. Because like you said, over time, your character has been changed. You know, pieces of you have been taken away. And so that's, for me, one of the most important things I think that we surrender to addiction is our freedom, our will. You know, God created the world and He gave us dominance. You know, He gave us power. He said, I want you to dominate the earth. And part of that power was having the will to control even ourselves. You know, and addiction robs us of that ability. It robs us of the ability to have self-control by surrendering our control and our freedom to that vice, you know, which is so, so deadly. And yeah, we could go on and on and on about this topic, really. If you have any comments or topics or questions regarding the addiction topic, please send us an email on brokennessmeetsgrace@gmail.com.
Maybe broken.
But it's in the Potter's hands. Bye, guys. We'll chat to you next week. Bye.